They say, you never notice the moment something starts to die. A marriage doesn't end with a fight or a slammed door. It ends quietly, when laughter fades into silence, when comfort becomes routine, and when love turns into habit. For the longest time, I thought Mark and I were perfect. We had a small house in the suburbs, a car that never broke down, and a calendar filled with family dinners and weekend grocery runs. He was my best friend, patient, stable, kind. The kind of man who remembered my coffee order and warmed my side of the bed before I came in from a shower. But sometimes, stability feels like stillness. And stillness can start to feel like drowning. I didn't realize it at first. I thought it was just work stress, or maybe age catching up with us. I was 30 when I started feeling that hollow ache in my chest, the kind that whispers, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" It wasn't Mark's fault. He was doing everything right. Maybe that's what made it worse. How do you explain emptiness when nothing is wrong? At work, there was this man, Bill. He wasn't particularly special. He just had a way of talking that made you feel like the only person in the room. We worked in the same department. He was loud, funny, spontaneous. Everything Mark wasn't. It started with small things. Inside jokes, shared complaints about the office, lunches that ran a little too long. He'd make me laugh, and I'd tell myself, it's harmless. The first time I noticed something was wrong was when I started dressing differently. Not drastically, just paying more attention. A bit of perfume. A new blouse. Lipstick I hadn't worn in years. I told myself it was for me, but deep down I knew it wasn't. One night, after a late project meeting, we all went out for drinks. I don't even like drinking, but that night I did. The restaurant was dim, the air buzzing with laughter, and Bill sat across from me, telling stories that made everyone roar. When his eyes met mine, it felt like static electricity, dangerous and alive. After everyone left, he offered to walk me to my car. I should have said no. I should have gone home. But instead, we stood in the parking lot under the yellow streetlight, the air thick between us, neither of us saying what we both knew. When he leaned closer, I didn't move away. And when he kissed me, it felt like falling, thrilling, terrifying, irreversible. That night, I drove home shaking. My hands on the steering wheel felt foreign, like I didn't belong to myself anymore. When I walked in, Mark was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. There was an empty tea mug beside him. He always drank chamomile when waiting up for me. I sat next to him and watched him sleep. His face looked so peaceful, so trusting. I wanted to wake him up and confess everything right then, but I didn't. Instead, I went to the bathroom, stared at my reflection, and whispered, "This was a mistake." And for a while, I believed that saying it was enough to make it true. But it wasn't the last time. It became a pattern I didn't plan. A lunch here, a text there. I kept telling myself I was in control, that I could stop whenever I wanted. But addiction doesn't announce itself. It slides in quietly, disguised as validation. I didn't love Bill. I didn't even think I liked him as a person. But I liked who I was when he looked at me, desired, exciting, alive. We crossed the line again. And again. Every time, I swore it was the last. Every time, I swore I'd stop lying to Mark. And every time I failed. 5 months. That's how long it lasted. 5 months of guilt, of lies about late meetings, of deleting messages, and avoiding eye contact. Each lie chipped away at me until I couldn't recognize my own voice when I said, "I love you." I remember one night vividly. Mark made dinner, pasta my favorite. He'd lit a candle like he used to when we were dating. He looked up halfway through the meal and said, "You've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" And I smiled. I actually smiled and said, "I'm just tired." That was the moment I realized I was capable of being someone I used to despise. A few weeks later, Bill told me his wife had found some messages. Nothing explicit, but enough to make her suspicious. He said we should stop for a while, until things calmed down. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It felt like withdrawal. I missed the chaos. That's when I realized just how far gone I was. The night it finally ended, there was another office party. Everyone was drinking, laughing, pretending to enjoy small talk. Bill caught my eye across the room, and I knew. One last time. That night was our ending. Messy, drunk, and filled with regret before it even happened. The next morning, I looked at my face in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked hollow, tired, lost. I called Bill and told him it was over for good. He didn't argue. He just said, "I get it." And that was it. 5 months reduced to 2 words. For days after, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time Mark touched my shoulder or smiled at me, I flinched inside. The guilt was unbearable, heavy like wet cement pressing down on my chest. One night, I broke down. Mark found me crying in the kitchen, but I couldn't tell him why. I said something stupid about work stress. He just hugged me and said, "You don't have to explain. I'm here." That made it worse, because he was there. Always. That's when I decided I had to confess. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't keep living like this. The lie had become heavier than the truth. It was a Sunday evening. Mark was lying with his head in my lap, watching a movie. My heart felt like it was going to burst. I looked down at him, at the man who had done nothing but love me, and I said, "Mark, I need to tell you something." He sat up slowly, concern in his eyes. And then I told him, "I cheated on you." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating us both. He didn't shout, didn't throw anything. He just stared, frozen, like he couldn't understand the language I was speaking. "How?" he finally asked. "It was a mistake," I said. "It happened once. I'm so sorry." And that was my second betrayal. Because it wasn't once. It was 10 times, maybe more. But I told myself the details didn't matter, that the truth would only destroy what little we had left. If I could make him believe it was one night, maybe we could survive. He sat there quietly, his hands shaking. Then he asked, "Do you love him?" "No," I whispered. "Do you still talk to him?" "No." "Will it happen again?" "No." "Never." He looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to decide if he could still see the woman he married. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me." And he walked out of the room. That night, he slept in the guest room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of my life and wondering when exactly I became this person. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, but I didn't, because I didn't deserve to. For the next few weeks, the house felt like a funeral home. Quiet, heavy, full of ghosts. He didn't yell. He didn't leave. He was just distant. When I offered to quit my job, he didn't even ask why. He just said, "If you think that's best." So I did. I left the office where it all began and never looked back. I thought that would be enough to prove I meant it, that I wanted to rebuild. But rebuilding isn't proof. It's patience. And Mark's patience, as infinite as it seemed, had limits I couldn't see. Not yet. After my confession, the days that followed were a blur. There was no dramatic shouting, no tears thrown across the floor, just quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into the walls and refuses to leave. Mark didn't talk much. He'd go to work, come home, eat dinner, and disappear into the guest room. I'd lie awake at night listening to the faint sound of his breathing from down the hall, wondering if I should be grateful he was still under the same roof. The hardest part wasn't his anger, it was his calm. It made me realize how much I had taken for granted, how deeply I had hurt the one man who had never wanted anything from me except honesty. Every morning, I'd make his coffee the way he liked, black, 2 sugars, and leave it on the counter. He'd take it without a word. Sometimes he'd nod. That tiny nod became my hope, my reason to keep trying. A week later, he sat me down. "I've been thinking," he said. "If you want to make this work, if you really mean what you said, you need to quit your job." It wasn't an order. It was a test, and he didn't even have to explain why. That office was poison. It held memories I could never erase. I agreed immediately. The next morning, I walked into HR, handed in my resignation, and packed up my desk. No goodbyes. I deleted Bill's number, blocked his social media, and erased every trace of him from my phone. It felt like amputating a part of myself, ugly, painful, necessary. When I came home, Mark didn't say much. He just nodded again. But that night, he didn't sleep in the guest room. He didn't touch me, didn't speak. But his presence beside me was enough to make me cry quietly into my pillow. It wasn't forgiveness, it was mercy. We started therapy 2 weeks later. The first session was brutal. Mark told the therapist that he didn't know who I was anymore. I told her I didn't either. There were long silences. Awkward questions. I tried to explain why it happened, but how do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? It wasn't about him, I said once. It was about me. About feeling invisible. Mark just nodded, expressionless. He didn't argue. That almost made it worse. After months of therapy, we started to rebuild small things. Dinner together. A walk on weekends. A shared joke that didn't feel forced. But beneath every smile, there was still that shadow. The reminder that everything I said had to pass through the filter of doubt before it reached him. One evening, about 3 months after the confession, he came home with a folder in his hand. He placed it on the table between us. "It's a post-nup," he said quietly. "It's not about punishment. It's about boundaries. About trust." I opened it. The terms were fair. If either of us cheated again, the guilty one would forfeit the house, the car, and any right to alimony. The rest of the assets would be split 60/40ths in favor of the faithful spouse. I didn't hesitate. I signed it that night, not because I wanted to prove myself, but because it felt like the least I could do after what I'd done. He had his lawyer review it. So did I. Everything was legitimate. When we signed together, he said, "This isn't revenge, Ella. It's protection. For both of us." I nodded, though my throat ached too much to speak. And just like that, we started again, carefully, quietly, like walking barefoot over broken glass. Over time, we found a rhythm again. I started working part-time at a small local charity. The people were kind, the environment gentle. Mark seemed to smile more. He'd call me during lunch sometimes, small talk about nothing important, and every time, my heart would squeeze painfully with hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were going to make it. 2 years passed. We celebrated our 7th anniversary quietly at home, dinner by candlelight, the same meal he made for me on our first date. He even reached across the table and held my hand. For the first time in years, I let myself believe we were okay. Maybe love could survive this. Maybe I wasn't a monster. Maybe people really could change. But guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't fade. It just learns to hide better. Even on the best days, I'd feel that small, cold whisper in the back of my mind. You didn't tell him everything. Every time he said, "I love you," I wanted to fall to my knees and tell him the whole truth. But I didn't. Because I was terrified that if he knew the affair had lasted months, not one night, he'd walk away. So I chose the coward's peace. And for 2 years, I lived in it. Then one evening, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I was chopping vegetables when I heard Mark's phone buzz on the counter. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, then picked it up. "Do you know someone named Alice?" he asked. I froze. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering against the cutting board. Alice. Bill's wife. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Alice? No, I don't think so." "Why?" He looked down at his phone again. "She sent me a message on Facebook. Said she needed to talk to me. Something about her husband and you." My heart started pounding so loud I could barely hear. Mark didn't seem angry, just confused. He looked up at me. Should I respond? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My lips trembled. I don't know what she wants." He shrugged, typing something quickly. "I'll just ask what this is about." The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. He stared at his phone, eyes scanning the screen as new messages appeared. Then his face changed, not shocked, not furious, just hollow. He put the phone down slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. "She said the affair wasn't one night," he whispered. "She said it lasted 5 months." The world went silent. I wanted to deny it, to say she was mistaken. But my body betrayed me. I froze, my face pale, my breath caught in my throat. He saw the truth before I spoke. Tell me she's lying, he said softly. I couldn't. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. So, even when you confessed, you still lied. Tears blurred my vision. Mark, please. I didn't mean to lie. I thought if I told you everything, you'd never forgive me. He laughed bitterly, a sound I'd never heard from him before. So, you decided for me. You took my choice away. Do you realize how cruel that is? I reached out to touch him, but he stepped back. Don't, he said sharply. Don't touch me. The look in his eyes wasn't anger anymore. It was disappointment, deep, tired disappointment. He sat down at the table, his head in his hands. I thought the worst was behind us, he said quietly. I thought we were healing. But you never gave me the truth, Ella. You just gave me a version that made you look better. Please, I whispered, my voice breaking. I love you. I've spent 2 years trying to make this right. He looked up, eyes red. You spent 2 years letting me believe a lie. That silence after hurt more than any words could. That night, he didn't sleep in the guest room. He didn't sleep at all. He sat on the couch, staring out the window, and I sat across from him, crying until I couldn't breathe. Every few minutes, I wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize again, but nothing mattered anymore. The truth had already spoken for me. When the sun came up, he finally said, I'm filing for divorce. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I can't do this again. I wanted to scream, to beg, to promise I'd do anything. But I saw it in his eyes. The love was gone. He wasn't angry anymore. He was done. I don't hate you, he said softly. I just can't trust you. And I can't live with someone I have to question every time she opens her mouth. He walked upstairs, packed a small bag, and left for work. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back. And that's how the silence returned, heavier than before, because this time, it was final. The morning he left felt unreal. I made coffee out of habit, poured 2 cups, and only then realized the second one had no reason to exist anymore. His toothbrush was gone. The drawer where he kept his watch was empty. Even the silence sounded different, less like peace, more like absence. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. I kept expecting the front door to open, expecting him to walk in, to look tired from work and ask what was for dinner. But he didn't. And the longer he stayed away, the more the air inside that house turned into a weight pressing on my chest. When he finally called, it wasn't to talk. It was to arrange the legal side of the divorce. His tone was careful, polite, professional. I'll send my lawyer the documents, he said. The post-nup already outlines everything. I wanted to say we can fix this, but the words felt useless. He had already fixed it the only way he knew, by ending it. The meetings were quiet. We sat on opposite sides of a long table while our lawyers read numbers and clauses aloud. I barely listened. I just kept staring at his hands, the same hands that used to trace my hair when I couldn't sleep. Now they were steady, detached, signing my name away from his. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy load for too long and finally set it down. When the last page was signed, he stood and said, "Take care of yourself, Ella." Nothing more. No goodbye hug, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet walk out the door. And that was it. 7 years together ended in 10 minutes of paperwork. People talk about heartbreak like it's a single moment, a crack, a tear, a scream. But it's slower than that. It's waking up and forgetting for half a second that the person you love is gone. It's setting 2 plates on the table before realizing you only need one. It's reaching for a voice that isn't there anymore. I went back to the small charity office where I worked. They were kind. They didn't ask questions. I learned how to keep my face still when people mentioned love or trust or forgiveness. But at night, when I came home, the quiet tore through me like broken glass. Sometimes I'd replay our entire story in my head. The first time he smiled at me, the way he proposed under that oak tree near the lake, the way he whispered, "You're my peace," the night before our wedding. How do you go from that to this? How do you destroy something that pure? I thought about calling him hundreds of times. Not to beg, just to hear his voice. To know he was okay. But every time, I stopped myself. He had given me closure by walking away. I had no right to reopen the wound. Guilt changes shape over time. At first it's sharp. It stabs every time you breathe. Then it dulls into something heavy that you carry quietly. Some days it's almost manageable. Other days it crushes you. I'd catch myself doing small things, keeping the house clean, cooking his favorite meal, watering his plants, as if I were waiting for him to come home. It took months to accept that he never would. One evening, I found the post-nup folder in a drawer. The paper was creased at the corner where we'd both held it to sign. Reading it now, the irony hit me hard. He had created those rules to protect us from future lies, not realizing the biggest one was still buried underneath. I used to tell myself I lied to protect him. Now I know I lied to protect myself from losing him. And that's the cruelest truth of all. Love built on fear isn't love. It's selfishness, wearing a softer face. Months later, I wrote him an email. I never send it, but I keep it saved in drafts. Mark. I used to think telling half the truth was mercy. I told myself sparing you the details would help you heal. But it only made me a coward. You deserved honesty, even if it meant losing me sooner. I'm sorry for every morning I let you wake up next to a lie. I hope you find someone who never makes you doubt a single word she says.
Ella.
I read that message whenever I forget why I'm alone. It's strange, the things you realize once everything's gone. You learn that silence is louder than shouting, that kindness can hurt more than anger, that the absence of hate doesn't mean the presence of love. People sometimes say, everyone deserves a second chance. I used to believe that, but I don't anymore. Because a second chance isn't something you deserve, it's something you earn. And I threw mine away the moment I decided that honesty could be negotiated. I think about the night I first confessed, how he thanked me for telling him. He thought he was thanking the woman he could still believe in. If he'd known then what he knows now, he wouldn't have thanked me. He would have walked away right there. Maybe that would have been kinder. I kept the house after the divorce. Technically, it was mine under the terms of the postnup, but it doesn't feel like it. Every room still smells like him. His laughter lives in the walls. His silence lingers in the corners. Sometimes I stand by the window where he used to drink his coffee, and I can almost see his reflection beside mine. He looks the same in my memory, gentle, patient, the man I couldn't be honest with. I talk to him sometimes. I tell him about my day, about the people at work, about how I finally learned to cook that dish he loved. I know he'll never hear it, but it makes the loneliness softer for a few minutes. A few nights ago, I dreamt we met again. We were older, sitting on a park bench. He smiled and said, "It's okay now." I reached for his hand, but before I could touch him, I woke up. For the first time in months, I cried, not because I missed him, but because in the dream, he looked happy. Maybe that's what real love becomes in the end, wanting the other person to be okay, even if you're not part of their peace. It's been a year since the divorce. I still wear my wedding ring sometimes, not out of hope, but out of remembrance. A reminder that love isn't a guarantee. It's a promise you have to renew every day with truth. I broke that promise, and this is what remains. People think the worst part of betrayal is being caught. It's not. The worst part is realizing the person you betrayed will heal, move on, and learn to smile again, while you stay behind, carrying the echo of their forgiveness you never deserved. Mark once told me during therapy, "Trust isn't rebuilt. It's loaned." At the time, I thought it was just a line. Now I know what he meant. He loaned me his trust, and I spent it on lies. And no matter how many nights I cry, or how many times I whisper "I'm sorry" into the emptiness, there's no balance left to repay. If anyone ever asks me what I learned from losing him, I'll tell them this. Honesty won't always save you, but dishonesty will always destroy you. It starts small, a half-truth here, a softened detail there, until one day you realize you've rewritten reality so many times you can't remember what's real anymore. That's what I did. I built a softer version of the truth and called it love. And when the real truth came knocking, it tore everything down. I live with that every day. And maybe that's fair. Maybe this loneliness is the only honest thing I have left.